Welcome to the Red, White, and You Show with Dean McMurray, the military media.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another great episode of the Red, White, and You Show with yours truly, the military medium. Today, friends, I have a great guest for you, Michael Surgue. He is an Air Force veteran and also a police department veteran as well. So he's got both sides of the house, the military and the civilian sector. But he's here today to join us and talk about everything PTSD and just about helping others. Michael, welcome to the Red, White, and You Show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So if we're going back a little bit, why don't you just share with listeners and viewers a little bit who Michael is?
Basically, I grew up in California in the San Francisco Bay Area. Was raised primarily by my mother and stepfather. My stepfather was in law enforcement, hence later on why I eventually get into law enforcement. And I had an interest since childhood. I was actually a police volunteer at 8 years old for the Sausalito Police Department, and eventually was a police explorer for the Richmond Police Department, both agencies here in Northern California. And in college, I studied criminal justice, and I went directly into the Air Force. They actually gave me a scholarship, and I went into security forces, which is military police, force protection, anti-terrorism, air-based ground defense, nuclear security, a bunch of other things like that. I served all over the world, and I did a little bit over 6 years active duty. And when I got out of the Air Force, I immediately transitioned into civilian law enforcement. That's when I moved back here to the Bay Area, and I went through a police academy, was picked up, and then I served in various roles. I was a training officer, a detective, an undercover agent on a statewide drug task force, and eventually was a patrol sergeant and a public information officer.
Wow. So sounds to me like it was kind of law enforcement was really in the blood to begin with. Wasn't really was it even a question for you at that point as far as what you wanted to do in life?
It wasn't. I mean, ever since a very, very young child, even before 8 years old, when I first did that volunteer work, I knew that I wanted to be in law enforcement. It was always a dream of mine. But it also, I wanted to go in the military. I wanted to do both. So I set myself up from a very young age and kind of planned my whole path. And, I had my whole life planned out. I mean, even once I got into the military, I knew I was going to do a defined period. And then I went into civilian law enforcement, and there were certain things I wanted to do. And eventually my goal was to be chief of police and lead a big department. And so I had everything planned out from a very young age.
Nice, nice. Well, and it's kind of interesting to hear that saying you had or you kind of had a plan from a young age. A lot of kids don't even know what the heck they want for lunch, right? So
Yeah.
it's great to hear. That's awesome. So, you make the big transition coming from military to civilian. Now, of course, you're going from one kind of law enforcement to the other. Was there a big transition there? Was it, of course, I don't have a law enforcement background. Never served in the Air Force, although I have, a lot of Air Force in the family. But is there a big difference, and was it a big transition for you, Michael?
There is a big difference, and it was a big transition, especially for me. When I went to the Air Force, I went as lieutenant, and I was a supervisor from the very beginning. And I remember my first flight, I think I had 60 people and was in charge of protecting nuclear weapons. And so there was a lot of responsibility, not just for myself, but for the people that I was supervising and leading. And as I progressed through my military career, eventually I made it to captain. And as you know, you get more and more responsibility, but it tends to be less hands-on and more decision-making, directing, planning, management. And so, but that was the thing. Even in the military as a young lieutenant, I liked the hands-on. I liked being out in the field. I liked going to calls. I liked, doing post checks and talking with troops. And so I kind of wanted to get away from the management supervision side and actually do the hands-on work. And so that part in itself was very different, but also even the basic law enforcement mission, although there's a lot of similarities, it's still very different. On a base, there's fences, it's protected, it's primarily military service members and their family. I mean, I know there's civilian contractors and visitors, but the crime rates are a lot less on a military installation as compared to a city. And with that, there's a whole range of other problems and issues that come up on the civilian side. And also, when you're in the military, it's very rank oriented. So if you happen to outrank somebody, or if you're just in a position of authority, people listen and they say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. In the civilian side, people don't listen like that. And, things aren't structured like that. Even within the department itself, I remember being brand new, everyone's like, stop calling me sir, like, call me by my first name. And it was much more relaxed and much more personal environment, where the military is very strict, very rank structured, very defined. So there definitely was a learning curve.
Uh, I guess I would completely agree with you from my past experience, right? And it does take a bit to get used to, but it's a unique perspective on the law enforcement aspect of something that, a lot of us peering behind the curtain, so to speak, a lot of us don't get the opportunity to hear that. So thank you. So going forward, so here you are, you're in the department. You've been in a number of years. So one of the things that kind of catapulted you to, or part of your journey to why you are here, was one of the calls that you responded to. Can you take us into that a little bit?
I can. And, up to this point, before I talk about this incident, my life was going exactly as planned. I mean, even on the civilian side, and my assignments, my promotions, and this incident changed my entire path, changed my entire plan. And I'd have to go back to December of 2012. I was a brand new patrol sergeant, so I'd been promoted from a detective to a now patrol supervisor. And it was my second solo week. So basically, I was, on duty. I was doing the job. I had a team I was running. The shift started the day after Christmas, so it was a graveyard shift, and we actually started on the 26th of December at 9:30 p.m. and we were supposed to get off at 7:30 in the morning. It was our Friday. I was looking forward to the weekend, looking forward to having 3 days off with my family. It was a very slow night, which is very typical for a lot of holidays, especially the night after Christmas. So the shift itself was uneventful. There wasn't any calls even that night that I remembered. I remember doing a few traffic stops. We had an overlapping team, which was a swing shift team, and they went home, and so did the lieutenant. And so at that point, around 1 or 1:30 in the morning, I was the only supervisor on duty for the entire city. And I had very minimum staffing. I only had 4 officers. And it was a little bit after 3 a.m. We were literally like 4 hours from going off duty. And that dead silence basically broke. And the dispatcher came on. She was extremely panicked. I could hear the fear in her voice. And she stated that there was a woman inside a condominium or apartment, and there was a man with a knife. And so at that point, I immediately start going. I can hear the other officers. I mean, everybody's going to this call. And as I'm getting closer, the dispatch is giving an update, and she says now the female and male are barricaded inside a bedroom. And I was a little bit confused because I wasn't sure if the boyfriend was the one with a knife, if it was like a domestic violence situation, or if there was a third party with a knife. And she clarified and said, no, there was actually a third party with a knife in addition to the barricaded couple. And I can remember my adrenaline's just pumping. I mean, I'm already can feel the hairs in the back of my neck stand up. I'm starting to sweat, but I'm just super focused on getting there. And I know the general area. It's Creekside Drive, which is basically it's one lane each way. It's a lot of condos and high-rise apartments. And I know the area, but I don't know this particular address. And it's really dark. And so I'm trying to get there. I get there in a matter of a couple minutes. And I remember I find the actual complex, but I don't know where this unit is. So I immediately park in front of the complex. I'm looking around. As I start to get out of my car, the dispatcher starts screaming and says basically there's a struggle, and the line goes dead. And she now lost contact with the barricaded couple inside the condominium. At that same time, as I'm exiting my patrol car, I can hear blood-curdling screams of a female coming from a distance. And it sounds like somebody's either being killed or dying. I mean, to this day, it's one of the worst sounds I've ever heard in my life. And thank God, as I'm getting out of my car, I see my female partner pulling up right behind me. And we know we have more officers coming, but we just have to start running towards the sounds. And we do. We eventually have to crawl under a staircase. We come into an open courtyard. and we can hear the screaming. All of a sudden, the screaming stops. I mean, literally, it goes from this just shrieking and screaming to absolute dead silence. I don't see anybody outside. I don't hear any noises whatsoever. We find the unit, we get in front of it, and we're announcing ourselves. We've got our guns out, identifying ourselves. There's no movement, there's no lights coming on. I try kicking open the door with no luck. My partner notices there's a huge window the size of a door. It's a louvered window, and it's shattered inside the condominium. And again, we're announcing ourselves, nothing. And we know we got units coming, but I look at my partner and we got to go inside. So she goes in first. I go in right behind her. When we go in, it goes directly into a kitchen area. And I can see like a cutout into a family room and a living room area. We basically go through the kitchen. She goes right, I go left. I clear the downstairs and I meet her at the base of a stairwell. And so this point, we know that there's no one downstairs. There's no obvious signs of a struggle other than the window, which is shattered in. Our guns are out. We're announcing ourselves. And we know this couple is somewhere upstairs. And we don't know where this assailant is with a knife. And so we're announcing ourselves, come out, show us your hands. And it feels like eternity, but literally we're talking seconds. Eventually, a male subject partially comes out. He's sweating profusely. His eyes are wide open. He's literally staring straight through us as if we're not there. I mean, I've never seen anything like this to this day. The best way to describe it is almost like a zombie. I mean, like something from a horror movie. And we've got our guns out. And we're saying, show us your hands, show us our hands. And his hands are down at his side, but we can't see his right side initially because he's partially coming out from the clearing onto the stairwell. Eventually, my partner screams, he's got a knife, he's got a knife. And I looked and he had a butcher knife clenched in his right hand. And again, our guns are out. We're yelling, drop the knife, drop the knife. No reaction at all. I mean, no body movement, no eye movement, no facial expressions. At this time, two other officers come inside the condo and I yell for one of them to get the taser, less lethal force. And so he gets behind us and another female officer goes perpendicular to the stairwell. He's got the taser out, we've got the guns out, and all of a sudden the male raises up the knife in a stabbing position and starts coming towards us. And we shoot. The taser misses. He comes down the stairwell. I can't see he's been hit. I don't see any blood. I don't see any injuries. The two female officers retreat into the family room area. The other male officer who tried to tase him drops the taser, pulls out his gun, and he's literally just a few feet from us at the stairwell, still clenching this large butcher knife. And we're yelling at him, drop the knife, drop the knife. And then he starts coming up back towards us and we shoot. And, unfortunately, there's no nice way to say it, but we had to take his life to save lives. And he was in between us and the couple that was upstairs. I ordered the other female officers to go upstairs. And it turns out this male subject had been stabbing through the bedroom door with the butcher knife. It was literally coming off the hinges. And this male and female were physically barricading their body against the door. And had we not gotten there when we did, I have no doubt he would have killed them, no doubt, and then killed us.
Wow.
And so, that's the basic incident, but it led to so many other things. We were sued immediately. I was put under 2 investigations, which is normal procedure, one from the district attorney and from our department for an internal investigation, and went through multiple interviews. And I remember just instantly later on when I went home that day, being up for over 24 hours, just exhausted physically and mentally. And I remember my wife at the time, I was happily married and I had a beautiful 2-year-old daughter. And they met me at my door when I arrived and I just felt numb. I felt completely just closed off and shut down. And I literally just wanted to go past them and go upstairs and go to bed with my blackout shades and just hope this was some bad nightmare or something that didn't happen. And I hoped I could just sleep it away. And that started my isolation, my depression, my drinking, my social avoidance. My marriage started falling apart. I endured this lawsuit for multiple years, and it just literally took everything from me.
Certainly a lot of dynamics that going into that, and that was kind of the catalyst for a journey. What, you know, how have you, you know, dealt with all that trauma that you experienced? How, you started experiencing all the, challenges and started shutting yourself away, in your words. What were some of the things that you used, Michael, to kind of find your way out of the darkness, find your way back again?
Well, first I have to talk about things I didn't do, and
Sure.
that's I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't trust anybody. There wasn't anybody that I felt that I could talk to about this. A couple things were that we were under direct orders because of the double investigations, that we couldn't talk to anybody about this incident other than, a clinician or a therapist, my spouse, which I didn't do. And then we got sued, and that drug on for years. And so we couldn't talk about it because of the lawsuit that was hanging over our heads. And so, my thing was that I didn't trust any therapists. I didn't trust any peer support people. I didn't trust, anybody in my apartment. I didn't want to talk to my wife about it. And so I shut everything inside and I closed myself off, and I started drinking more, drinking myself to sleep, and just isolating, avoiding all social interactions, avoiding family events. And there was a big catalyst event that happened about 5 or 6 months after my shooting. And it was one of the first court proceedings that we had. It was called the Coroner's Inquest. And in our county, they don't have them in every county, but in our county, when somebody dies, and police are involved, so it could be like a car pursuit and it crashed into somebody and they die, or like a suicide in a jail setting, or like a police shooting like this. They have what's called a coroner's inquest, and there's a judge or a commissioner. There's a full jury. It's open to the public. It's on record, and they bring in different people to talk about, like they bring in forensics people, pathologists, witnesses, and you have to testify. And so at this point, I invited my wife to the proceedings because I hadn't really told her what happened. And our marriage is now falling apart at this point. I wanted her to hear everything and to hopefully understand what I was going through and maybe have some compassion and empathy, and help me and be there for me instead of pushing me away. And I remember there were several people from my department. There was probably 20 different people, the whole command staff, supervisors, detectives. The family members of the person I killed were there, and he had an identical twin brother, which I didn't mention before.
Oh, wow.
There's reporters there, and I remember sitting in the courtroom before I testified, and they played the dispatch tapes from that night, and it was the first time I'd heard them. And literally, it brought me right back to that night. I started sweating profusely. I had tunnel vision. I felt like I was going to pass out. And literally, I was right back on Creekside Drive on December 27th. And I got up on the stand, and literally there's a jury less than 3 feet away from me just staring at me, in this entire courtroom filled with like 60 people just staring at me. And I'm talking about what happened. I ended up just breaking down emotionally in front of everybody, which is something I'd never done. I'd never done it in my personal life, not in the military, certainly not as a police supervisor, not in a courtroom. And I was embarrassed. And the judge at that point, he thanked me. He said, "Sergeant, we have what you need. We need your excuse." And so I left the courtroom literally for 5 minutes just to splash water on my face, to pull myself together so I could go back in the courtroom, which I did. And we ended up getting through the proceedings. My officers testified they did outstanding. About 2 weeks later, we got the finding that we wanted for this hearing. And I remembered my lieutenant called me into the office, the captain's office. And I thought for sure I was going to get kudos or acolytes. I mean, literally, I was a brand new sergeant. I think the last shooting that happened at our agency at that time was like 14 years earlier, even longer. I mean, shootings just didn't happen in my city at that time. And, we saved lives. Our officers weren't hurt. We did the right thing. We were cleared by the district attorney. I thought that my career was just basically on fire, and that goal of being chief was going to happen, so at some point. And I remember as soon as I walked in the room and I looked at the faces of the captain and lieutenant, I could see it was not a look of joy or happiness. I could see that something else was going on, and I just felt the whole mood of the room shift. And I sat there, perfectly straight up, my hands on my lap, just yes, sir, no, sir. Again, because of my military background, and these are captains and lieutenants that are talking to me, and I'm just a brand new sergeant. And a couple things happened that were absolutely pivotal to my journey and my downfall at this point. And the first thing was that they questioned the genuineness of my emotions. They directly said and inferred that I was acting or putting on a show in front of the jury and literally questioning my integrity. And so imagine this, a former Air Force Security Forces captain, undercover special agent, police sergeant who doesn't get emotional. And I did, and I was ashamed and embarrassed about it. And now I have my quote unquote so-called leaders, people that I thought were family, that are questioning everything. And I was just absolutely baffled. But again, because of my military background, I didn't talk back. I didn't argue. I didn't question it. I just sat straight up. Yes, sir. No, sir. I was listening to what they're saying. They then questioned my leadership ability, which had never been questioned at any point in either my military or civilian law enforcement career. I mean, my career was off the charts at this point. And then my probationary status as a sergeant got extended, which I'd never heard of before. And this is where I messed up. This is where I take the blame, because I should have had the courage and the strength to ask for help. I should have told them how I was feeling and what was going inside my heart and in my head, and that my life as I knew it was absolutely falling apart. But I couldn't do it. I was too scared. I was too ashamed of what they would think, especially after questioning the genuineness of my emotions. And so I made a conscious decision, which was the wrong one, that I was never going to show emotion again. I was going to bottle this up. I was going to put up a front, and I was going to fool everybody. I was going to get past my probationary status, and I was going to continue on with my career. And I became a real asshole. I became unapproachable as a supervisor, as a person, as a husband, as a family member. I became where I didn't care. I was unsympathetic. I had no compassion. People came to me with their problems. To myself, I thought, you have no clue what a real problem is. I ended up losing my marriage. My health started to fail. I started having repeated skin cancer. This lawsuit I talked about, we had depositions every year where I'd sit across the table of the father of the man that I killed, 8 hours at a time being videotaped, reliving this event year after year. This literally was not something I could forget. Because of this pending lawsuit, I had to make sure I remembered everything in finite detail. And I couldn't forget it. I couldn't put it behind me. And so I thought in my head that once this lawsuit was over, all my problems would magically disappear. And that's what I told myself for 4 years. And so fast forward to September 16, we went to federal trial in San Francisco, one of the worst places you could imagine, one of the most liberal leftist places, anti-law enforcement. And I'm sitting in a federal courtroom as a defendant on trial with a full jury, with the family members there and the identical twin brother of the man I killed. The face that I couldn't get out of my nightmares for years is sitting directly behind me in the courtroom. And so we endure this trial and we end up prevailing. And I thought everything was going to get better, but it didn't. It got worse because I started to question myself. I started to second guess myself. They brought in all these crazy expert witnesses who were calling us cold-blooded killers and coming up with these crazy theories that we made this whole thing up, that we planted evidence, that he was never armed, that he was never trying to kill people. And literally we saved this couple and they testified to it. I mean, but still the toll that took. And so I started putting myself in dangerous situations at work, hoping I died in the line of duty because I didn't want to be here any longer. I was tired of living with this. And then what happened, thank God, it's a miracle, is my best friend, a Vietnam veteran. He was a 35-year reserve officer. He was my partner. When I was on duty on day shift in November, about a month and a half after the trial, he tried to kill himself when I was on duty. He slit both wrists, stabbed himself in the torso multiple times, OD'd on multiple prescription medications. And I saw him right when the ambulance brought him in before he went into emergency surgery, covered in blood, just in and out of consciousness. My best friend. And I had no idea he was suffering. I had no idea what he was going through. And I had so much guilt. And I didn't think he was going to make it, but thank God he did. He lived. And he is here today. But he's the one that saved my life, because a month after that happened is when I finally got the strength and courage to ask for help. He saved my life.
Hmm. Interesting. What it was, it just the thinking of your best friend and how he was able to pull through? Is that what you got through, or got you through, or was it some words of wisdom from him that
It was none of that. It was my guilt.
oh, it was just the guilt that brought
It was
you?
my shame. It was what
Okay.
I saw the impact on his family members when I
Sure.
was sitting side by side with his sister in the hospital waiting area. And I saw the impact that it had on me for
Right.
not recognizing the suffering and what he was going through. And I started blaming myself. And all I could think about was my young daughter and how was she going to feel? How is she going to feel when her dad's not here because he took his own
Right.
life? And
Right.
then she's going to blame herself. And then what effect is that going to have on her for the rest of her life? That's why.
Right. Right. So here you are, you're the attempt to suicide by your one of your best friends, saving your life in a sense, essentially from the guilt that you felt from it. Um, so take us forward. What were you have this epiphany? What were some of your steps that you took to move forward from there?
The most important and critical step was that I got aligned with a culturally competent therapist, somebody who works only with first responders
Mm.
and has worked with them her entire career. And on the first day that I met her, and she was recommended by two friends of mine who were involved in very serious critical incidents. And the first day that I met her, she shared a very deep personal story with me of something that happened to her many years earlier, a very tragic, horrific incident. And when she shared that incident with me, I instantly knew that I could trust her. I knew that she got it because this wasn't something she studied in college or read in a book. She actually lived it and survived it and came out the other side. She was living proof that you can get better in the deepest, darkest of times. And so, because of that trust, that allowed me to open up, to share, to fully talk about what I needed to talk about. And also, more importantly, to know that she got it. She understood it. That was critical. The next thing was she told me about peer meetings. These aren't peer meetings within an agency. These are outside of any agency. They're all over the US. They're all over the Bay Area. They're usually one by one or two first responders. And it's a 12-step meeting and it's confidential and it's open to only first responders, either current or retired or off on injury. And that was where I met firefighters, paramedics, dispatchers, people who I'd never known before. In the first few meetings, I just listened. I just sat back and listened. And what I saw was these grown men and women who were sharing, again, their deepest, darkest experiences and their feelings. They're being real, they're being human. They weren't worried about some promotion or some assignment or some position. They were worried about getting this off their chest and sharing and being real people. And again, that gave me the strength in a group setting to start to share, to know more importantly that I wasn't alone. I now had 20 people that I could pick up the phone day or night and I could call and say, I need to talk or I need to meet with you right now. I need to, meet you at a restaurant or coffee. And I knew they would be there for me. And that's the thing. In all my years of working at my civilian law enforcement agency, there wasn't anybody there that I felt that trust with, that I felt that strength with. Because I always had that fear of what's going to happen with my job, what's going to happen with my promotion or my assignments. What are my supervisors going to think? Now I'm in a judgment free zone, basically, with full disclosure, full trust. And that was absolutely life changing. So the combination of therapy, of the group meetings, and 5 months later, I went through a program called the West Coast Post Trauma Retreat. And that's basically a week long intensive retreat for only first responders, again, dispatchers, firefighters, paramedics, cops. And it's to help people with PTSD. And it's got chaplains, it's got clinicians, it's got mostly peers who have all been through the program. And some, went 6 months earlier, some went 10 years earlier. And I went through this program. And again, I met more people who were just like me, who were feeling the same things, who had experienced the same kind of effects from repeated trauma on the job and early childhood trauma. Again, giving me the strength. So my family of people that I could trust and talk to just kept growing and growing. And eventually I became a peer volunteer. And so now I go back every year for a week or a couple of weeks at a time, and I volunteer as a peer and give back. And I can't tell you how life changing that is to know that you aren't alone, because I think most people end up committing suicide or trying to harm themselves because they feel absolutely alone. They feel like nobody understands it, nobody gets them, and they can't trust anybody. And they're ashamed, they're embarrassed about talking about feelings. I mean, we're human, we have feelings, and we are exposed to just so much trauma, so many traumatic events. They take an absolute toll on us. And we have to change this culture. We have to make it okay to talk about this stuff.
Let me ask you, Michael, with just the tremendous amount, I know you're talking about, your experiences, the area that you serve, but, really this is a epidemic that's all over, right? So wherever you find first responders, law enforcement, and everybody, this exists. And so, it, have you been seeing or have you been hearing the culture changing? Because the concern that some have is if they reach out for help, that it's going to affect their career. They're going to be blacklisted or stigmatized, whatever the case is. Hey, you're broke or you're less than, you won't be accomplished the mission. Have you, first off, I guess it's a two-stage question. First off, have you seen that? And secondly, have you seen the culture changing?
Yes. So, my shooting happened in 2012. And I can tell you that right now, 2021, things have changed. Things have gotten better as a whole, dramatically in many cases. But I also know that there's a lot of agencies that are far behind the times. And there's a lot of agencies out there that don't have the resources. They don't have peer support. They don't have the trusted clinicians or therapists who are culturally competent. And the culture is to where it still is, it's a sign of weakness, to talk about this stuff. Another example that I had was I recently spoke at another law enforcement agency here in Northern California. And before I spoke, I had a very long talk with the chief. And the chief made it very clear about the culture of his agency and the willingness of people to talk about the effect of critical incidents and trauma and to just be open about this stuff. And he mentioned a lieutenant who I later met, and he told me the story, which I thought was a perfect example of how things are changing and how easily they can be changed. And basically, this agency had a annual peer support training. And this is training not for the people that do peer support, but for the entire department, where it's kind of like you're checking a box. You have to go through the training. It's a couple hours long. You talk about the program. And unannounced, unplanned, this lieutenant decided to open up in front of the entire department and share his personal experience and what he had gone through after being involved in several traumatic incidents, to where his life just started falling apart. And the thing was, nobody in the agency had any clue that he was suffering or what he was going through, because we're so good at putting up a front and pretending like everything's okay. And so people were literally in shock that this lieutenant who's in command staff high up is being open, is being vulnerable, and he's sharing what happened to him. And then he shared how he got better and how he's still working on things. But, it's a simple example of how, by leading by example and good leadership and just showing that you're human at all levels, from the chief all the way down, and showing these brand new officers that, hey, it's okay. Look at me. I'm a seasoned veteran. I've been a cop for 30 years, and, I'm a lieutenant. I've had a successful career, but I almost lost everything. And here's why, and here's what I did about it. But that's what we need, is we need that open vulnerability, and we need it from all the way at the top, whether it's the chief, captain, lieutenant, all the way down. And it needs to start in the police academies as well. And it's not taught in the police academies. I mean, nobody like me comes in the academy and talks about how they almost took their own life because of the toll the job had on them. We learn about how to deal with people on the street, having psychiatric issues or 5150s or people gravely disabled, but we don't learn about how to take care of ourselves, how to talk about our feelings, how to talk about how these things affect us. And I firmly believe if we address these incidents as they happen, you can go a full career and work 30 years with no problems. But in the culture as it was back then, nobody talked about it. So you just bottle it up and you try to drink, or you have extramarital affairs or gambling addictions or porn addictions. You seek other things to overcome that and make yourself feel better, but you're only making things worse, and that's the reality of it. And so we need to make it to where that's not the norm. The norm is talking about this stuff. And the key is you have to trust the people that you're talking to. As a perfect example, after my shooting, we had a critical incident debrief with a therapist who was contracted with the department, with the people in my shooting. And all I could remember was to myself is that I'm going to say what I need to say so I can get back to work as soon as possible. And that's what I did. I didn't talk about my feelings. I didn't talk about how messed up I was. I just wanted to get back to the job as soon as possible. And that's what we all did. I think we were off for 2 weeks max when we were back on the street. And nobody was sharing. Nobody was being open. It was more like, let's check the box. Let's do this. Let's get back. As opposed to if we would have been in an environment where we trusted each other enough to talk about this stuff, I think there would have been a different outcome. Maybe there would have been more time off. Maybe there would have been more resources, made available, as opposed to let's just get back to work.
Right. Certainly a lot of different dynamics and things come into play with that. It was interesting that you talk about where, everybody doesn't want to share. You talked about that lieutenant, right? And where everybody was shocked. Isn't it interesting that a lot of times that we even want to try to lie to ourselves? Everything's fine. I'm good. Like was it the meme? Everything's on fire around them. And they're like, I'm fine. I'm good. Everything's good. Well, it'll work out, right? I got a plan. And, to make ourselves feel better because in the past it's worked. And whatever that was, you talk about the addictions or whatever.
But I can remember a specific story you just brought up is that
Yeah.
I was specifically told to say everything's okay. There was a day where I was having a really rough day and I was in the midst of everything going on with my life. And I was with a supervisor and a higher ranking person came down, and I decided on that day just to share a little bit. And as soon as that person left, that supervisor pulled me aside and said, look, don't do that. If they come back down, just say, everything's good, sir. It's good to see you. Everything's fine. Don't be sharing that stuff with them. I was specifically told that. And that's what I'm saying, because it comes down to, that fear of that supervisor was worried about how's he going to look when here I am sharing this stuff with a higher ranking person. He's going to think, well, why didn't you just tell me about that? Why are you telling him about it? And so you have this fear that people are worried about their own image, as a supervisor, and they don't want to acknowledge that their people are suffering because they think it's a bad reflection on them.
Right.
And how messed up is that? I mean, to be told, just tell them everything's fine. And the scary part is the other side of that is how many people are suffering in silence. How many people are pissed off when really their life and world is falling apart. And that comes back to, the suicide numbers. I looked today, and right now we're up to 88 law enforcement suicides for the United States. Last year was 174, and the year before that was 228. And the simple fact is that we're much more likely to die by our own hands than the hands of another. I mean, think about that. We do all this training for firearms, defensive tactics, high-speed driving, all these other areas in the academy. We spent over 880 hours on training. Then you have like 22 to 26 weeks of field training. Then you have all this annual training. But how much training do we spend on our own survival as human beings?
Right.
We don't.
Right. It's kind of mind-boggling when we and it's great that there are people like yourself, Michael, that have walked the walk and are saying, you know what, enough's enough. I'm going to start, speaking about this. This needs to be talked about. I need to talk to other people so they know it. They don't need to suffer in silence. Right. And so when did you start speaking?
So that was never planned. I actually owe it to one person. It's kind of a funny story, but I have a really big presence on LinkedIn. I always have back when I was a PIO. And I started posting just kind of like educational stuff on PTSD and suicide prevention, but I wasn't really sharing anything personal. And a guy named Danny Bird, he's a former cop in Santa Clara County here in Northern California. I didn't know him. And he runs a podcast. And he basically hit me up one day. He's like, look, I want you on my show. I want to talk to you. And I'm like, I'm not interested. Like, leave me alone. And he literally harassed me for like a year. I mean, not joking. He kept bothering me. Thank God he did. But finally, he's like, look, I will drive the 2.5 hours to you. I will set everything up wherever you want to meet. I just need an hour of your time. And so he got me to the point where I committed. He met me at a Mimi's Cafe. I'll never forget. We were in the back room. I show up. He's got a camera set up. He's got headphones, a computer. And I'm thinking, we're going to have some good breakfast. We're going to get to know each other. And he's like, look, I'm in a big rush. I got to drive back. It's a 2.5 hour drive. I got to be out in an hour. So let's just do this. And so I sat down, and it was video recorded, and I just opened up and I shared. And, it wasn't just that, but it was when he shared it. When he shared the recording, it took this burden off my back, because I had been so ashamed. And even though I asked for help, even though I did all this recovery work, most of the people that I worked with or from other agencies I interacted with, they had no clue of anything I was going through, of anything I was thinking that I was doing to myself. And so once it was all out there, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and there was a lot of ugly, it was like, you know what? I can't control it anymore. It's out there for anybody to hear. And in fact, I started getting messages from all over the world of people that listened to it, and they started sharing their personal experiences. Nice. And how what I said resonated with them. And it was that alone, that was the one thing that just spurred, this podcast thing. And then eventually it turned into public speaking. And now it's turned into working on one of my dreams, which is writing a book, which I never thought would be possible.
Yeah.
So it's all just, kind of falling into place.
So tell us about your newest, your work, your future book here, Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma.
So, I have to first give credit to one single person who made this a reality. And her name is Dr. Shauna Springer, also known as Doc Springer. And she's a psychologist, a Harvard grad. She's worked with combat veterans and first responders her whole career. She's written, I think, 3 books already. And, we formed a friendship a couple years ago, and we had a conversation, and she was like, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I told her honestly, I said, look, I am so burnt out from 20 years of report writing. I can't see it happening. I would love for that to happen, but I just don't see it happening. Like, I don't think I can do it. I don't think I have the fortitude to make this happen. And so we kind of let it go. And she hit me up months and months later, and she's like, look, I have a proposition for you. And she's like, I want to make your dream a reality. I want to write your book. And so it happened. And, we're co-writing this book, and it's about 80% done. But here's the thing with this book. I think it's going to be truly a lifesaver. I think it's going to change so many things. And it's going to have like 13, 14 chapters, and every chapter has 2 sections. The first section's in my voice. It's my story all the way from childhood till now. The second part of every chapter is going to be her separate notes, analysis, explanation, dissection in a general sense, so that anybody, whether you're a first responder, a military member, a family member, a loved one, or just somebody on the street, they can pick up this book and they're going to see the human side of a first responder. And they're going to see the toll that this job takes on us and why it does. And so it's going to be absolutely amazing. I cannot wait for this thing to be released.
You brought up one aspect, and I think it's so important, because on the show, we always focus on, of course, coming from the soldier's point of view, the first responder, whomever, because they're usually the one telling the story, right? But one of the ones that we typically don't hear from, and I'll work hard to change that, is the family's perspective, the trauma they went through watching their loved ones struggle, trying to navigate their way, with this monkey on their back, as you say. And it's interesting because a lot of times when we talk, they get mentioned, but then it's gone like a mile marker, right? It's like down the road, but they're a big part of, loved ones, whether they're however they fit in the family dynamic. They're a big aspect of that.
Absolutely. And, the thing is that they put up with so much and they deal with so much. And I give credit to the spouses that are out there every single day. They're the ones that have our backs. They're the ones that care about us. Those are the ones that we need to worry about. We don't need to worry about, overtime, about special assignments. We need to worry about our family and our loved ones. I lost my marriage, and I'm truly hoping that more people get the strength and courage to ask for help sooner than later, like I did, so that doesn't happen to them. And that's the key, is that our spouses, families, and loved ones, this book is going to give them that insight, that explanation. So they're going to understand what these people are going through, because they blame themselves. When we come home angry and pissed off, they automatically think it's because of something they did. And they're walking on eggshells around us. And they don't realize that it has nothing to do with them. It has to do with the job and its toll on us. And it's changing us as human beings.
Right. Well, and it's interesting too, is the other aspect of children, when you bring the children dynamic into it as well, and trying to figure out why mom or dad is angry, or why mom and dad is the way they are too. And that brings another dynamic. So I think it's really important that was addressed. And I think that's so awesome. We look forward to seeing that in the book. And of course, I want to add Doc Shauna Springer, big friend of the show. Of course, we've had her on previously. We love her book. And she's a straight shooter, right? She will not try to bluff you. So she'll shoot you straight. So awesome. So talk about a little bit Saw. So Jay Clark, founder of Saw, was on, I believe it was back, wrote it down here, episode 4 of season 2. Great individual, doing great things. How did you get involved with Saw, and how does that come into bear with what you do?
No, I'm glad you brought that up. So actually, I'm coming up on the year anniversary. I went through Saw a year ago in August.
Nice.
And,
okay.
Save a Warrior, it's focused on the childhood trauma. And it's something that, again, we don't talk about a lot. And it's something that I didn't talk about. I pushed away. I kind of covered up. I even made myself believe that it wasn't there. And, in my case, it wasn't anything extreme. I had a emotionally distant biological father who later was an alcoholic and a drug addict. But I had a great mother and a great stepfather. And so I just kind of created this perfect life for myself, kind of forgot about that and pushed it away. But Saw made me realize the impact of having an emotionally distant father, what it had on me. And it had that fear of abandonment, which later came into play when my department, my agency, abandoned me when I needed help. And we didn't even go into that because there's a whole nother area about administrative betrayal and the agencies turning their back on you. And we'll have to save that for another show. It is going to be in the book, but Save a Warrior provided that insight for me. And that's the thing, is that most first responders and a lot of military active members and veterans, we all have some kind of childhood trauma. It could be minor, but it could also be very extreme, like, sexual abuse or physical abuse. And we don't choose these careers by accident. They choose us because at a young age, we're able to overcome adversity. We become natural caretakers, problem solvers, right? We put up that front, like everything's okay. And we go to school and our friends and everything's good at home, and that's the thing, is that we have to deal with that too. So we need to deal with the work trauma, and then we need to deal with the childhood trauma. And when you have both, which in many cases, it's complex post-traumatic stress. So you have the childhood trauma with the work trauma on top of here. And so I worked on this, the work trauma, but I never worked on this. And so now I worked on both. And that's the key, is that you have to work on both these things. Now, the amazing thing about Save a Warrior is, which I still can't believe to this day, it's free. There's literally no cost. That first program I told you about, West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat, that costs thousands of dollars to go through. Save a Warrior doesn't cost the person anything because it's all funded by donations.
Right.
It's run by volunteers. And that's the power of this program. And not only that, Save a Warrior is available to veterans, active military, and all first responders. And in many cases, like when I went through, it's a combination of both, because a lot of veterans become first responders. We're naturally drawn towards the work. And so Save a Warrior is literally saving lives. I mean, they are doing something that many other programs aren't doing. And I highly encourage anybody listening to this, look it up. It takes 5 minutes to apply online. They literally schedule one phone call, and in that phone call, they decide whether or not the program's right for you. It's that simple.
That's so awesome. Yeah, they are doing some tremendous things. Just Save a Warrior, as well as so many other organizations as well. But I know Jake Clark and his crew out there are kicking ass, taking names, and saving lives, and that's what it's all about, and helping people find their way. Michael, where can they find you? Do you have a website, social media, all that great stuff?
So there's a few ways. LinkedIn is really easy. I have a big presence on there. You can just look up my name, and I'm on there every single day. On Facebook, I just created the page 2 weeks ago, but it's Sergeant Michael Surgue, and I post updates on the book, podcast interviews, things like that. But I also run another Facebook page called First Responders First, and an Instagram page with the same name. So First Responders First. Now, the beauty of those two pages is that I'm constantly putting information on post-traumatic stress, suicide prevention, resiliency, that applies to all first responders, that applies to military, veterans, spouses, loved ones. So there's a lot of great educational information, a lot of resources that I post every single day on those two sites.
Michael, if there's an organization listening right now, if there's a department or something, and they wanted to potentially have you come and speak, how can they do that?
Simply just send me a message either on LinkedIn or the Sergeant Michael Surgue page. I check that every single day. And I've actually got 2 that are going to be happening later this year. So just send me a message and we'll make it happen.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, Michael, first off, I just want to thank you for your courage to, share your story and help others. But obviously, thank you for your service, and thank you for what you continue to do. But let me ask you, is there anything else that you wanted to share with the listeners today?
One thing, and that's if you're listening and you're suffering in silence, ask for help. Because the thing is, there is help, and it takes work, it takes courage, and it takes time. But I'm living proof that there's a whole new life on the other side. And the same can happen just for you. So please just raise your hand and ask for help.
Beautiful. Well said. Thank you so much. My guest today, Michael Surgue. Thank you so much, sir. Thanks for being on the Red, White, New Show.
Thank you.